Hello folks, welcome back to the Xone live Q&A sessions. Al here at A&H HQ down in sunny Cornwall, and I can see a few people already in the chat room. Willie, hiya, nice to see you. Anybody else, give us a shout, we'll shout you back. If you've got any questions, please type them in the comments section of whichever channel you're viewing on. We're on Anil and Heath, we're on Xone Official YouTube. You will be able to catch the streams after the session, and we will follow up on your questions. Quick before I go into today's session, which is going to be talking about effects routing, and I'm going to be using the PX5. I'm just going to give a quick nod to a few people who have been asking some questions on some of the other channels. If we haven't replied to you, please bear with me. We've been away, starting to get out and about again, starting to go to a few festivals and some clubs and stuff. So we're kind of out and about, getting feedback, listening to your questions in other places. And what I might do with some of the sessions is review them again as a revisit to the same topic. So Willie, I'm afraid I'm not going to answer any questions about Avantis. This is a Xone session, so we're talking about the DJ kit. Effects routing. iTown musicians, hi from Cornwall, welcome to Florida. As I was saying to Willie, this is a Xone session, so we're not talking about the Pro Live, the MI, SQ, D Live, Avantis. Jack, Keith will be back with more sessions, Nick for the other products, but these ones with me are really just to give us a little bit more attention to some of our Xone users and the DJs out there. Ask us a lot of questions about stuff, so we're trying to focus on those and give you some overviews and a point of reference where you can ask us questions about features or particular products of our mixers. So if I just show you what I've got set up here today, as I've said, the topic is Xone FX, sends and returns, inserts, internal effects, external effects, and USB. So it's routing for, as it says, effects and different ways of doing it. I'm just going to show you my setup here today. I'm using the PX5, and I've just got a loop running in here on the media player. If I turn that up, hopefully you can hear that's going on there. I won't keep it in focus all the time, and I've kind of got all the bells and whistles plugged into this today, so I can show you. I have up here the commonly used insert effects you see in most booths, the RMX. I am also using a little pedal, one of my little favourites, as an external effects. I have an iPad, iOS, is running AUM, the app, and in here I have got a delay as a send and return effect, and I've got a filter running as an insert effect into the channel. So we've also got on the PX5 its internal effects engine. So I've kind of got a way here of talking about or giving you an overview as to all of the options for this mixer, and a lot of those, with the exception of the internal effects, are common to most of our other Xone mixers, and how the routing and stuff works. So that's the plan. As I say, anybody out there got any questions, wants to fire me some WTFs about anything I'm talking about, that's fine. Any burning questions that you've asked support and we haven't answered yet. But to go through the topic and what you'd have seen in the description, these are some of the common questions we get asked on a daily, weekly basis with different mixers. So the difference between a send and return effect system and an insert effect system, how you can use the USB sound card on the mixers to send and return to effects that you're running in software. That could be, as I said, on the setup I've got, could be the iPad for our current products. Could be that you've got a computer connected and you're using Tractor, want to set up send and return effects from that, or Ableton Live is another common one, the DAWs that people use to run their VST plugins from. And Bad, nice to see the PX5 in action. Yeah, you know, so far I've kind of used the 9.6 mainly for the Q&A sessions, and we do plan to talk about the other mixers, and the PX5 is certainly one that I like, and as I said, it kind of gives me the opportunity to demonstrate all of the different ways that you can hook up some effects to your DJ mixer. Just its flexibility is great, really is. It's only got one send and return that you can see here at the top of the channels, but you can configure that one send and return for either external effects, which I have on this channel. You can set it to be the send to internal effects, which we will talk about, and you can set it up to work with both. So it's only one send, but you can do quite a lot with it. And as I say, having the capacity to have the internal sound card routed and running USB effects as well just kind of means there's so many options on this that it's probably going to give me plenty to talk about, and I will try and cover some bases coherently for you. So let me start off with the difference between the send and return and the inserts. We know, as I've showed you, I've got an insert set up on this one with the RMX. It's used widely amongst users and pros, and we do see people asking about, oh, it sounds a bit this, it sounds a bit that. If you try and set that up as a send and return, it's not really how it's suited or designed to be used. So that's performing the function of my insert effects, and on a PX5 we have insert points on the rear panel of the mixer, and as my send return effects I've got a pedal here and the VST ones I said with the sound card. What's the difference? I'm gonna just share a little diagram with you whilst I talk about it, and hope this will give you a point of reference that you can put on pause, you can have a look, and I'll walk through the wiring of this. In short, the difference between a send and return and an insert is that a send and return sends a portion of the audio that you're playing out from the mixer to another device. You mix that sound with the effects unit, and then it's the output of the effects unit comes back into the mixer on a different channel. So you could think of it as, say, like shouting in a cave, maybe is a good non-technical analogy. When you shout, you hear that echo. What you're hearing is you shouting in your own ears and the bounce back off the wall of whatever it is that's echoing. That's analogous to a send and return, very non-technically. And what you can see on the diagram here with the red lines shows the back of the PX5. The effects sends would be wired out to the input of an external effects unit. Your processing goes on in the effects unit, and then the output of the effects unit comes back on the PX5 either to the EXT return, which if I show you on the mixer is this one here, what we would call a short return. Comes straight back into the mix bus, and you can adjust the level of that there, or you can route it back in. If I come back to the diagram and show you on a line input, so you could come back in on the PX5 on the line A, or what I'm actually doing for this session is I'm coming back in on a line input on a spare channel, because I'm only using one for my music. I'm bringing the return back in on a main mix channel, The reasons for doing that is partly for the demonstration. On some of our mixers you've got EQ, a full 3-band EQ on a line channel, whereas something like the 23 you just have a short return. Other mixers you might have a short EQ, so we might only give you a low and a high EQ to tune your returns. So again, it's very flexible the way that you can set this up. Just to go over that again, I'm using the RMX here connected up as the insert, and my pedal here as a send and return, and the iPad as a send and return. And to go back to the diagram again, that is performing the function for my external return as a normal setup. This gives me an option, and I'll show you some examples of that in a second. And then the insert, and this is one that foxes a few people because of the nature of the wiring, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail now, is the insert point on the rear of the mixer provides a connection which will route out of the mixer into your effects unit, out of the effects unit and back into the mixer using the same connector. And the difference between that and the send and return, to go back to my shouting in a cave analogy, is that rather than shouting in a cave, it interrupts the signal, takes the signal to the processor, returns the signal from the processor back into the mix bus. So rather than shouting in a cave and hearing an echo coming back at you, it might be like shouting down a drain pipe and somebody listening at the other end of that. Excuse me, that's not a very technical explanation, but that's by design. I don't want to get too bogged down into technical sound engineering speak. I want to just try and give you examples that are perhaps a little bit easier to understand. So if you stuck your ear to the end of a drain pipe and somebody shouted down it, they'd sound different, but the difference they would sound would be a combination of their voice and a slap back from the wall. That's the send and return. The wiring for an insert is quite common in the audio industry, and anybody familiar with live mixing consoles or studio consoles might be more familiar with an insert as a dynamics processing connection point. So for a graphic EQ before your mix bus, compression, something like that, on a live console. With a DJ mixer, you might normally insert your effects out of your player into an effects unit, out of the effects unit, and then into your input. The reason for having the insert is it enables you to put it at different points in the signal path, and typically we would put it on the mix bus. And if you have a look here, what the one cable does, you use a insert jack, sometimes called a Y lead. There's maybe a little bit of confusion with a Y lead, which is a splitter, and a Y lead, which is an insert jack. And the insert jack has a TRS connection on one end, tip ring sleeve, and then two jacks on the other end. Now in the diagram here it's showing you a balanced, you could have an unbalanced cable there, so a mono jack at each end here, but always on an insert it will be a TRS here, and that is wired tip to the send, ring to the return, and then the sleeve is a common ground. So as I say, the send wires the audio, routes the audio out of the console in to your effects unit. The processing goes on in the effects unit, and then you have the output back down the cable, and it returns to the console on the ring connector on the TRS jack. So I leave that up here. You can take a pause of this on the session, have a look at that and the differences. With a send and return, we're using one cable to connect to the input, another cable to connect from the output back into return here. And we would typically use either a TRS cable, or if you want to use unbalanced, you can use a mono jack to RCAs. As I say, with my setup, I would quite often choose to use a line input here to return to the outputs of my effects. Let's have a look. We've got Greg answering Willie. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate that. And sharing the links. It's what we like to see. Everybody getting involved a little bit. Let me show you an image of the send and return examples. Typically used for pedals, and the ones that I'm showing you there is one I've got here. Let me show you on a different screen. So I've got this one in the place of the pedal. The other one that you see commonly is little Boss DD7s. See those all over the booths, and they're great little pedals. Make a nice little setup. You can get some good delays and sounds, and there's different ways of connecting them up. So here, and again, I'll leave this on screen for a bit so you can see the differences, and I'll close this as well so you Thanks, mate, for letting me know there's no sound. Hopefully that's come back. Possibly me turning off that channel. My producer is away in the festival circuit at the moment, so thank you, Bad. Apology about that. Running the production from my own fingers here. Where did I lose you? Probably when I started talking about the pedals. As I say, the diagram here that I'm showing you is a mono input to a stereo output. The difference is a mono input to a mono output. That will still mix in stereo in the mixer, so a left input there will still be going to the left right outputs of your mixer. And then the other diagram here, because what we see is people want to use the delay and a reverb typically, and the PX5, as I said, only has one send. This will just demonstrate a way that you can connect the DD7 and the RV6 in this case. Say we know a lot of people are using those, and get an output of both of those. This one here showing you how to connect that up. So you go into the B input of the DD7, come out of the A output into the A input on the reverb, come out of the A and the B on the Boss, and what that will give you in the mix is a combination of the delay and then reverb added to it. You can ask questions about that if you like. If you've got that set up and you've had a play with it and you can't quite get your head around it, here's a point of reference. Ask us some questions and some context, and hopefully we can give you some answers. The other one here shows a way of connecting from the one send and getting you two discrete outputs. So again, I'm going from the effects send on a mono connection only, going into A on the delay. I'm coming out of A on the delay into my aux return on the PX5, left mono again, and then from the B on the delay into the B on the reverb, and out of that into the EXT return. So that will give me one send from the mixer, but two discrete returns. If I just wanted to add a little bit of delay to a track, I can use the aux input on the mixer, and if I just want a bit of the reverb, then I can have the EXT return. So if I just see if I can show you that as well in terms of the mixer and the top of the mixer, that setup that I was just showing you with two pedals, I'd still be using this external, I'd still be using the one send, I'd be setting it to external, and that send will go out of the console. One of them comes back in on the EXT return, the other one comes back in on this channel, so I can kind of use a bit of both. If I just want the reverb, I can have that one turned up. If I just want the delay, I can bring this one into the mix. So that's how those work. Does the does the line high Z need to be depressed for pedals? Some pedals, yes, and that's why we've got it there. The Boss, certainly it will improve the level. What it'll do is it just gives you a way between the high impedance inputs that some old kit and some pedals are used to. They're typically designed for is a guitar to be plugged straight into them, and more dedicated DJ effects or rack effects that offer typical line level inputs and outputs. So if you've got something like a rack mount effect, a studio effects unit, something that's a dedicated DJ send and return effects system, you don't need to have the high Z switch pushed in. But if you're using guitar pedals, so like the one I've got here, or like the DD7 there, then yes, it's likely that you're going to want to push that in so that you get the signal level back into the mixer at a better way, balanced for the mix. The other thing I've got going on, which I want to talk about a little bit, and I will bring some sound in at some point to demonstrate kind of how they work, is the use of the iPad. And again, that could be a computer running tractors send and returns, or live send and returns. We have done a session on sound card routing where that was covered in a little bit of detail, and we can go back to that if there's some interest. But I thought it'd be a nice opportunity to show that our current products are iOS compatible, and as the world is looking to take less kit around at the moment, and another piece of hardware in an increasingly shrinking booth, does that make sense? Increasingly shrinking? I think you know what I mean. Less kit, a little bit more compact, and the iPad will enable you to hook up some really nice means of audio. If I just show you here kind of what I'm doing. This is, as I said, AUM, and I've got an input here connected up to the sound card of the mixer, and I am taking as an input 9 and 10, USB 9 and 10, which is the sound card channels which route the effects send over you. So that's the effects send I'm sending into this channel. Then I've got a little delay running into that, and this is outputting onto 1 and 2. So you can see some metering there. That is the output of this effects unit. Perhaps what I'll do is see if I can show you that with a little bit of audio as well. A bit of judicious use of the crossfader. Hopefully this will come out alright and you'll be able to hear me. The signal there is the input I've got from the media player, and if I bring it in, that's just the track on its own. And if I bring up the feedback on this one, you'll hear this crossfader as I bring it in. What you'll hear is just the return from this effects unit, so you should be able to hear the delay coming in. I'm going to put my phones on a minute just so I can double check that is what you're hearing. So that's just a dry loop. You can hear a little bit of the effects in there. So that's this routing out the USB 9 and 10, coming back in on 1, 2 as a USB source. And because I've got the tails going there, you can hear them. If I, why do I bring it back in on here? As I said, I like to have the EQ control. You do have it on the PX5. Some of the other mixers you don't. I tend not to use all 4 inputs for audio sources the way I mix. And in this case, it gave me an opportunity to use it alongside the crossfader so I can demonstrate what's going on. So you've got both coming in. That's coming up the send here. Sending on 910. Coming in on 910. Processing through that. The output is back to 1, 2. And one thing I'll talk about in this context is the mix. And if I was paying attention, you would have the mix, the dry wet mix control on your external hardware would be set to fully wet. Typically speaking, when you're using a send and return, the output of the effects unit that you want is just the output of the effects unit. And this is where I think people start to come into issues if they're using an RMX or some other processing units which don't have a dry wet mix option on them. You use that as a return. What you get coming back into the mixer is a combination of the output from the mixer, the processing of the effects, summed together as an input. And if you've got those two side by side, the mix of the channel you're playing together with an output with some content from the input, if you follow me, you'll start to get maybe a little bit of phasing, certainly with RMX and digital processors, the latency in those. Some people find it a common problem, but depends what effects you use, to be fair. But as I say, as a sort of best practice, general principles, you want wet setting for your external effects. So that'd be the mix, usually the control. Sometimes they are called dry wet. Good evening, Ambient Wanderer. A couple of other questions in here. How about a dedicated master effects unit for a Xone 96? Thank you for the feedback. We'll put that in the bag. Like I say, the questions and stuff are welcome. And your feedback, if your feature requests, your future ideas, we will listen to everything that you say, and it will all get chewed over and discussed. So do please feel welcome to comment. It helps me know that I'm not talking to myself as well. So where was I? I'm going to show you again the USB routing that I was talking about here. And one of the other advantages for using the USB as a kind of effects return, this is the PX5. So the sound card inputs and outputs, the sound card input is the mixer channel sending to the computer, or the iPad in this case. So how I've got it, I'm using 910 as a sound card input, and that is a switched option on the PX5 between the master left and right or the FX send. So I've got that option set on the rear of the mixer. You'll see a switch. So I'm sending the effects send signal up the USB cable to my computer / iPad, and then the output from the computer back into the mixer. I'm using 1 and 2, so it's coming back in on channel 1 of the mixer. And in most good DAWs or applications, if I go back again and show you the setup here, as I say, I'm coming back in on 1 and 2, and I could pick from any of those sound card channels. So if I'm already using all 4 of these for CDJs, turntables, 4 sources, could be rack mount kit, I can come back in on my aux 910. 96, you've got 2 options on your sound card, channel A, channel B, and then still got your 4 mix channels. But if you've got more effects you want to add to the mix, and different ways that you want to play, part of the exercise here is to just kind of sort of show you that that is possible. Don't be afraid to experiment a little bit as well, and try stuff out. Most of the external hardware and kit that you're going to be connecting up will have line level inputs and outputs. That's not going to cause you too many problems connecting up, and trying again, possibly refer back to some of the conversations we've had about gain staging, and I can revisit that again in the future if anybody's got particular head scratching issues with that. But if you know how to set up your gain stages okay, and you know how to connect the line inputs okay, you know you can connect a mono input to an aux channel and still hear it as a stereo part of the mix, or you've got stereo outputs, you want to put them in on line level, that's all good. The only sort of one caveat with the DJ mixers is having the phono inputs, which are just for the turntables, and unless you want to start using that, we're not talking about scratch today. So where else am I talking about? And there's not too many questions coming in, so we maybe keep it a little bit shorter today. Let me just have a quick look through. We've got a few people in there, so you're either listening intently and getting all of this, or you're a bit shy to ask a question, but please don't do that. Here we go. I have a question. Excellent. Ambient Wanderer, thank you very much. I was wondering if you could answer it for me. When playing certain tracks on my 43C, there is a volume discrepancy between the line level meters and the master volume. Okay, that's going to fall under gain structure, Ambient. I did a session previously, so you can have a look at the ANH sessions page or the Xone and ANH YouTube channels. Find the session that I had talking about gain structure. In short, what it means is that you're probably mixing with your, let's have a look, between the line level meters and the master volume. So your line level meters in this context, to go off on a bit of a tangent, the line level meters here show you the level of the input relative to the gain control. Okay, so that's how loud I've got the input turned up before it goes through the faders. If you see, I can show you this probably on the output that I've got here. In fact, if I cue that, hopefully you can see this. I've got the cued channel going here, and that is putting the same signal level onto the main meters. If I take this cue off, what I've got then is what's going out to the main left rights on these meters, input coming out there. If this and that are different when you don't have any cues selected, this is telling you how loud the music is, the combination of all of the music. So depending on how many channels, and if you can see here, I have got the fader not all the way up, and I've got one of the curves set here on my channel fader, which means that is what it's the fader position here is accounting for the discrepancy between the two. All of our mixers mix up there at unity at the top, and the other discrepancy you'll see there is because of some other stuff I've got routed around, some filters coming in here. Again, I've got faders up here and stuff like that. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent because that's too easy for me to do, and I'm trying to keep focused on the effects. But have a look at the gain staging session, and by all means, if you want to ask some questions in that session, I'm happy to revisit it at another time. So hopefully that answers that question for you, Ambient. See if I can get myself back on track to the effects and where I was in my discussion. What have we covered? We've done the sends and returns for you. I'll bring you this back up as a point of reference so you can have a look. A quick reference for you there, the difference between the sends and the returns, the wiring out to the unit, wiring back to the unit, and the inserts out of the insert on a PX5, on a TRS, tip send, ring return, sleeve ground, takes the signal out to the processor, back from the processor as an interruption to the signal, and the send and return sends an amount of the signal to the effects unit, and then you want the wet output, 100% wet output, only the affected audio coming back into the mixer, and then you're blending the balance between the two. Obviously you want your mix track at the level you want it in the mix, and then depending on what the effect is and how you want that to sound, that's a subjective issue. You might want it loud in the mix, you might want it quieter in the mix. And here's one of the other topics that I was going to cover as well. Do you want it pre or post? Generally speaking, you might consider your effects to be post fader, so that they're relative to the level of the music that you've got coming out of the channel. And that's how typically effects sends and returns would be applied. As you turn your fader up, any send that you've got going will be relative to that level, depending on your return levels. So it kind of makes sense in most cases, because the effect is an additive audio source to your mix. You might not necessarily want it to drown out the main mix or kind of overwhelm it. So you have your effects send post fader, and it's relative there. Why would you have it pre-fade? I mean, typically on a send for some of our consoles, we might use a pre-fade send as a monitor source from a channel, so that you can send signal that's coming in to an output without it going to the mix bus, or independent of the level here. One of the things you can use it to good effect with as an effect, pre-fade, is a kind of different sound altogether. I mean, one of the things I really like to use pre-fade is a reverb. Why? You get that kind of down the bottom of a bucket, all the way down a well sound if you send pre-fade into a reverb unit. And I love that sound. Anybody who's into kind of dub music or ambient music, it's a very, very atmospheric tone that you get from sending like that, and you can have as little of the main source for that effect coming to the mix at the same time as well. So pre-fade sends for effects, perhaps a bit more creative application than as a I've got a tail out, I want to add some delay, I want to add some crunch or something like that, that's a part of the mix, that's sort of summed with the mix as part of that overall mix level. I hope you can follow that explanation. How to do effects with Dante. Ooh, that would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? We have customers that want effects for installed sound with AHM products. The information will help. A session to cover connectivity with AHM would be great. That's an interesting one. Farid, this is being broadcast on the Allen and Heath channel, so I appreciate that there's a lot of engineers listening to this as well as there might be DJs. And again, please feedback what you're after. We're hoping to keep these, planning to keep these sessions going, hopefully an ongoing session, and I'm happy to talk with the other guys, either if it's something that they want to do dedicated to a live or a studio type mix scenario, or whether it's actually a question of, you know, how the heck does a DJ start to work with a install system or some of the more complicated everything I/O. They're all good topics up for discussion, so I'll touch base with Keith and Jack once next time they're back in the office, and we'll have a review of the questions. I think if it's probably Dante and AHM, maybe even Nick, about using effects and stuff like that. But I know there's fascinating ways that everybody's routing audio nowadays, and the Everything I/O that we offer for our other products kind of makes all of that possible. And again, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to use the PX5. And if I go back about pre and post fade, one of the other things that I've got going here is this other channel, and what I'm doing is I'm coming into the iPad on 5 and 6, which is this channel here, and I'm coming on 5 and 6. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the input to this channel directly into the iPad, and then I'm processing it with, in this case, and there's a good reason for this, a filter, and then I'm outputting from the filter back into the channel. So it's what it's kind of doing in this context, sorry, I've just left you with that up on screen, is I'll show you that again. I'm coming on this example, this is USB insert effects processing. So I am using the input into this channel, which is this CDJ playing audio. I'm taking it directly from the input as an input source into my iPad. I have then got a filter in line. The output of the filter is coming back into this channel. So insert effects over USB. And why am I doing that? One of the other sessions that we had was talking about filters, and we know some people have said, you've only got one filter on the PX, you know, why is that? Well, and I suggested that you don't necessarily need two. You've got EQs, on the PX5, which is essentially a filter. They're isolator filters. Commonly, people using two filters are doing a high pass on one track, low pass on the other, bringing in the bass, dropping out the bass, that kind of typical transition between the two. But if you want more filters, and let's face it, who doesn't? This is a really nice way, I think, of adding that extra filter into your Xone setup. You've got a sound card, you've got an iPad, there's probably another iOS option that I haven't tried yet, and certainly with a laptop connected up you can do this. So I've got here a little filter plugin, and I'll bring some audio back in again on this so you can have a bit of a listen, I think. Probably put my headphones on just to make sure it's not audio soup. But so rather than routing this to the filter, here I've got this channel routing through a filter. There's my second filter. Let me see if I can just bring that in the mix for you. I'm going to turn that one down. I'm going to turn this up. Hopefully you've now got that loop in the mix, and what I will show you here is me applying the filter as I add that into the mix. So just for the point of reference of anybody who was listening earlier on Dry and Wet, this is 100% dry because I've got it on an insert. What I've got coming back into the channel is essentially the output of this, not a mix between the two. This is the mix between the two. So I'm going to turn my mix up. You'll start to hear this filter come in, and I'll leave it in at a point you can hear it. So as I bring that in, that's now a very quite harshly filtered sound, but excuse me if it's a sort of rudimentary example of what the audio sounds like. I'm not trying to demonstrate some mixed tips and tricks. I'm trying to demonstrate the routing. So if it's a little bit blunt, excuse me, because I've not got some monitoring and it's not a mix session, but we can have some stuff like that in the future to sort of show you these in practice in a mix and stuff like that as well. But to say, you can see that now, that's coming. That's essentially the input into this channel. Rather than it being that, it's come from that to this, back into the channel, and there's my extra filter. That leaves my VCF stage free for the other channels. So I'll take that back out. Back to my dry mix. And if I want to bring in my delay, what have I put him down here? You can see him running in the background. He's coming in onto this channel. I bring him back up in the mix. That's that delay. The other one that I haven't demonstrated in practice, in terms of anything you can hear, is the insert. I've talked a lot about it, shown you a diagram of it, and maybe haven't let you hear what that sounds like. You can see it here. I think most of you who are familiar with the DJ setups will know what one of these is, what it looks like, and the controls on there, so excuse me if they're out of screen. But if you can hear this audio now, what you'll hear is me switching it in, and then I've got a fairly heavy reverb set up on the unit. I'll turn this up a little bit and then mess with some of the controls on that so you can hear the difference as it comes in. again, I'm not trying to teach you how to DJ and mix perfectly. There are plenty of people out there running courses you can tune on to. So hopefully that demonstrates to you what's going on there. That is applying the sound of that RMX unit in line with the mix. So everything that's coming out here is going out of the insert point that I've showed you before into the effects unit. It's being processed by the effects unit, and the combined output of everything is what's going out to the speakers. What else have we got plugged up here that we can play with that we haven't talked about? I can see a couple of questions. JCDJ, is it possible to update the PX5? No. That's a fairly short answer to that. Sorry, it's a fixed effects unit. The effects section is not updatable. What we've built into the PX5 are a series of effects that the guys figured were the most commonly used. They're a kind of hybrid of some of the DB series effects and the culmination of feedback at the time, talking to the DJs who were working with us when the PX5 was brought out. So sorry, no, you can't update the PX5 effects. If you've used them all and run out of effects, again, the session here is hopefully going to give you a few more ideas of what else you can do to bring some different effects into your mixer. As I say, you've got the internal effects. If you haven't got any other hardware, if you haven't got a computer, if you just want to take the mixer out, or you're just getting used to it, getting started out, then we think the internal effects are quite a good selection to choose from. I guess I probably haven't actually shown you how I've got that set up here a minute. So I do have, if I go back to my overview of this, I have the return of my VST effects routed internal send to this effects unit. So what I'm doing here is I can send from this channel to the effects unit. The output of the effects unit I'm then sending to the filters and to some internal effects. So I'm adding kind of multiple effects types and paths into my mix. And people who kind of want to get quite creative with sound mixing, in terms of rather than blending two tracks together or beat matching a couple of tracks and kind of creating a soundscape, if you like, some ambient stuff, some of the kind of techno genres, is a little building on stuff. Certainly if you're using kind of external hardware and Euro rack, you might actually have a fairly minimal amount of audio sources input, but what you can do then is add effects and signal paths in and out of that mix, and that's kind of what I've got going on here. So if I put some audio back into this in a second and stop talking, I'll show you the output effects routing to input effects on the mixer. Let me see if I can get that going for you a sec. So that's the dry loop. That's the effects that you can hear tailing off there. If I turn the feedback up on that so I get it running a little bit longer. If I get that feeding back on itself. And then so that's me. That's just the filter on what is only the effects return, or that is the internal effects added to the external effects return. So I'm starting to add effects on top of effects on top of effects and put that through the filter and stuff like that. So again, if you don't think you've got quite enough effects here, see what else you can add to the mix. There's going to be quite a few options. Certainly with the PX5, you can do a whole load. If you're paying attention, rather than trying to have a conversation at the same time and broadcast, you can get really creative with that. I mean, I could spend hours with probably that loop on its own and the filter and some just effects and bits and pieces, and somebody will come and tell me to play another track. But if you're into that space and into that mix space, like I say, I'm adding, well, we've got 1, 2, 3, 2 effects, 3 effects, 2 filters, all that's on one track. I haven't even started to try and put another track into the mix there yet, but hopefully you've kept up with the conversation, you've kept up with the routing that I've described. I'll show you again some of the differences, so you've got a point of reference on screen. This will give you an overview of the difference between the send and return, typically sending out post fade into your pedals, the fully wet output of the pedal back into your EXT return or into an aux channel, and an insert which goes from the insert points on the PX into the processor, back out of the processor, back into the mix bus, and showing you how that's wired up. Tip is to send to the unit, into the processor, through the processor. That's all of the signals. So this is a kind of it's not a wet dry. It's what goes in is all of it, and what comes out is all of it with the effects added back in on the return on the ring, and that's what's coming out of your speakers. So it interrupts, it breaks the signal path, takes that signal to the processor, returns the sum of both of those back into the mix, whereas the send and return is a balance between the two. And hopefully my shouting at a wall or shouting down a drain pipe analogy is something you can also follow. The other things that I've showed you, again, you can pause on this and have a quick look. The different ways to route some pedals and the ones we see typically used. The Boss, they're really popular at the moment. I've got a little tape echo pedal here which I like. There are so many out there, you know, and the choice is yours and subjective, but if you've got one send and you want to add more than one pedal and separate those returns, these overviews here will show you how to do that. We can make this diagram available to you. I'll put it in the comments perhaps after the session. We'll add it to our FAQs for the Zone. If you want to ask any questions about it, please feel welcome. The other things that we're just demonstrating for you is how you can use the USB channels as a send and return for your VST. So on the PX5 it's 9 and 10 is the FX send. On the 96 you've got 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 as send options. On the 43C and the 23C you've got a default for USB, sends the as a USB output by default on 2 of the sound card channels. That's a stereo pair. And then in terms of how you route it back into the mixer, typically if you're using up all of the other inputs, 9 and 10 as your return for the PX5, 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 on the 9.6, which is channels A and B. If you're using the USB on the 43C, the USB routing brings it back into the mix for you as that short return I was talking about previously. Again, if you haven't kept up with what I was talking about or how I was describing it, or you're looking at the diagrams here and going, what about this, what about that, please ask the question so we can give you the answer that you need, and consider how else we cover future sessions. I'm probably going to leave you now. Any more questions somebody want to get in before I go? If not, that's fine. As I said, you're welcome to add the comments after the sessions. We do read them. If we haven't answered, please just bear with me, or us. We will get round to it, or we're looking at them and going, okay, we'll revisit that session and we'll cover some of the questions in more detail. So I do know that I will be coming back and talking about gain staging again. Fine adjustment of gain controls is one that's popped up. People getting a little bit confused with what they're seeing on meters and how perhaps they're adjusting or setting and forgetting some controls. So I'm going to return to that one. I'm not sure I've quite decided yet what the next session is going to be. It might focus on another mixer as well, actually, because we've had a few on the 96. PX5 here today. Perhaps we'll show you some tricks and tips and talk about the 23 or the K2. That's one I'd definitely like to talk to you about. We've got some interesting applications for that. Controlling your VSTs. I haven't set up a K2 here today to control my iPad effects, but I could do. So there's plenty we've got to talk about. I would really love it if you guys will give us some more questions. Something for us to get our teeth into. Gain stage of attracting would be an interesting one. Ambient, that's a great one. Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that as well, because I know Traktor offers headroom settings, and maybe some of you want a little bit more information on that. How we come in and out of Traktor. Again, the gain staging there is one. Yeah, I'm happy to cover that. Perhaps we'll talk about DAWs or DJ apps as our sound source in the next one as well, rather than the typical analog digital, perhaps CDJs or turntables. Perhaps what I'll do just to close this session off is bring some audio back into the mix, hopefully not offend you all too much, and just kind of demonstrate a few more of the applications that I've got here. I know one of the ones that I didn't do is the external effects unit. So if I just do that now to show you, this is bringing the return of this, or the output of this, back into the short return here. It's already sending post fade, and it's a little bit tricky with the setup I've got, but I can show you how it works and that it is working, just with probably some. Let's turn that one down. I'll bring that back in. I'll bring the effects return to the mix back up, and as I bring that up, it will start to come back into the mix. That's coming back on the external return. Just to show you, I can put that back through the filter as well. So see if we can get them all briefly in the mix just to demonstrate. There's the dry. There's the effects external return on send and return. Here is my send and return on the USB, back on this one. Let's get the feedback down on that again, or a bit on that. Turn that off a bit. And that return is coming back through the internal returns and the filters. Why not? And if I bring the insert effects on this one as well into the mix, it probably all starts to sound a little bit soupy and crazy, but hopefully you can see there, it's such a flexible system, the Xone series. You've got internal effects, you've got external effects, you've got VST effects, you've got inserts, you've got sends and returns. There's a whole lot of stuff there to use. Get some audio into the mixer, hook up some stuff, and again, the best thing I can say is have a play, practice with it, experiment with it, and have some fun. I'm going to love you and leave you. See you again in about a month's time. Hopefully we'll be out and about at some festivals again and some clubs before we see you again. And please fire questions at us. It's what we're here for, and we want to support you in the way you need us to help you get the best out of the mixers. So once again, thanks for coming, thanks for staying, and see you again next time.